When I was a boy, my grandfather would often tell me that with age comes experience, and with experience comes power. A true statement to be sure, but I couldn't help but find it slightly ironic, as at the time, he was head of not only the youngest house in the Riverlands, but arguably the most powerful. 150 years is how old my house is. When I was old enough to understand how long that was, it astounded me. So imagine the look on my face when I learned families like the Starks and Lannisters are over 1,000. A small blessing in this case, as I need not cover nearly as many events when talking about the history of my home. Sven Lane was technically our founder, but his father William set our foundation. A simple stonemason who was one of many working on the famous King's Road at a young age. However, the task took nearly 3 decades to finish. In that time, William had started a family of 5 and needed to support them all. So, with permission from Lord Ramsay Chambers, he was able to settle some land between the Red and Blue Fork rivers. A difficult burden given the risk of flooding, yet he was able to overcome them thanks to knowledge gained from foreigners from his days in King's Landing and the Cranach Man in the Neck. He was able to use the floods to his advantage. What started as a single small hut changed into a small village in a month and a respectable town in a few years. This massive growth was noticed by the previously mentioned Lord Chambers, and so offered William a seat on his council as a financial advisor. Though William wasn't gifted much in financial aspects, he was a very frugal man, so simply holding back the Lord from his more ridiculous spendings helped in keeping the lands profitable and allowed him to stay on the council for 23 years. For his leal and loyal service, Ramsay Chambers had given William many gifts, the most prominent being a marriage pact between the two, by having his daughter Bethany Chamber wed William's eldest son Sven. And after the passing of William, granted Sven the title of Lord, with permission from King Viserys, of course. It was Sven and his 2 siblings who designed the banner, a golden trident on an emerald green background with a blue border surrounding it. And with the town that William had created being their capital, it needed a glorious name. And so given its location and rising importance, Trident's Crux was picked. While being named to the position of noble would also allow them to pick a new name, all of William's children stayed with something simple, Lane, so that their descendants would remember their humble beginnings as simple road builders. Sven also served on Ramsay's council as the Master of Coin, and proved to be more capable than his father given he was blessed with a better education. Though this would not last long, as Ramsay would pass away a few years later, and his son Jonathan Chambers seemed to have inherited his father's worst traits, ignoring all of Sven's advice to such an extent that Sven relinquished his position and rode back to Trident's Crux. The young Lord Chambers went through the wealth his father had kept in a very short amount of time, and now in need of coin, he sent word to his vassals, demanding tributes in order for him to keep his debaucherous life going. Sven was the only one to respond, saying that all 7 hells would freeze over before House Lane would give even a half penny. Jonathan took offense to this, declaring Sven a traitor to him and the realm, and ordered him surrender himself to stand trial. Sven responded by marshalling his militia and marching to war. Jonathan was amused by this. After all, Sven had only been a lord for half a decade and could not hope to match the professional army that he had. Mounted knights in thick armor on horseback, men-at-arms in strong gambeson and proper weapons, instead of hoes hammered into the shape of a blade. And he was right. In a fair fight, Sven stood little chance of victory. But in war, only a fool engages in a fair fight. The reason why Sven marched so quickly to war was that he needed as much land as possible to harass Jonathan's forces before they could make it to Trident's Crux and set the town aflame. From the trees and across the rivers, arrows flew at the marching chamber forces, dealing minimal damage but drawing first blood, and more importantly, embarrassing Jonathan. It would not look good for him to have difficulty dealing with a force so much weaker than his own, and it made him brash and reckless. When he was a day's march from Trident's Crux, Sven finally set up for battle and held a position across the Blue Fork, which had become quite shallow. Eager to kill the man who had been causing him so much trouble, Lord Chambers wasted little time, ordering his men into formation and charging across the river. Steel clashed and the sound of men screaming in rage, fear, and pain filled the area. The more professional men-at-arms and knights were too difficult to deal with, cutting through the first line of Sven's forces. Despite them trying their best to defend and hold the line, Yet, it was about as perfect as one could hope for Sven, as from the river, a flood came crashing down. When Jonathan Chambers was organizing his men, Sven had sent a rider down south to give the order to the people of Trident's Crux, to topple a dam that was built and let the waves carry the enemy away. The knights and men-at-arms in their heavy armor could do little as the water smashed against them, most falling over and being swept away, drowning in the raging waves. Those able to crawl onto the shore were either captured or cut down if they refused to surrender. And when the body of Jonathan Chambers was discovered a day later, bloated on the river bank, Sven officially declared himself the victor, and his wife, Bethany Chambers, though now Bethany Lane, was the new head of House Chambers, meaning that their children would inherit both titles and become the new lords of the Trident. There was some commotion after such an event. The changing of lordship in such a matter does not happen often, and the Lord Paramount of the Riverlands, Grover Tully, ordered Sven to travel to Riverrun to explain himself. Luckily, there was more than enough evidence that it was Jonathan who was the aggressor, and he was merely defending himself and his family. The matter was settled. House Lane would become the lords of the Chamberlands once Bethany passed away. Given the Chambers castle was more impressive and formidable, House Lane chose to make that its now capital and home. Such blessings on a family have rarely ever been seen in such a short amount of time. But with the history we know, this luck would not last forever. King Viserys Targaryen would pass away in less than a decade after these events, and chaos would erupt. Two factions emerged claiming a different heir for the Seven Kingdoms. The Blacks with Queen Rhaenyra, the firstborn daughter and chosen successor by Viserys, and the Greens with King Aegon, the eldest son of Viserys, who was the rightful heir given the laws of gods and men. Despite their liege lord Grover Tully declaring for the Greens, and many of the neighbors to House Lane declaring for the Blacks, Sven chose neutrality instead, ordering his forces to patrol and guard the borders of his lands, preventing any and all from entering. This, however, would not spare them from this bloodshed, as Prince Aemon Targaryen on his great dragon Vhagar torched towns and castles in the Riverlands which he believed disloyal to the Greens and Aegon's claim. This included the former castle of House Chambers being set aflame, with both Sven and Bethany still inside, including the small garrison and servants. Their two children, Aquila and Matthew, were at Trident's Crux, and when the news reached them on the tragedy, their anger drove them to declare for the Blacks officially and to seek justice for the death of their parents. Matthew would fight bravely, but sadly perish during the Battle of the King's Road, being slayed by Lord Baratheon, leaving his sister Aquila as the new Lady Lane and ruler of the lands between the Blue and Red Fork. She was nicknamed the Marshall Maiden for two reasons. First, a silly rumor that she wore a male garb and marched into battle with her brother, but the second is how she changed the foundation of the Lane army after the bloody civil war had finally come to an end. She changed the tax laws to lower if you were a registered soldier or smith sworn to her family, encouraging able-bodied men and smiths to move to her lands. This proved so successful that she founded 3 different groups. The first was the Trident Knights, an elite group of soldiers that only the best of her army could achieve. While there was no limit to how many could achieve this title, never more than 100 at once were able to. The second was the Trident Guard. These were hand-picked by the Master-at-Arms and a member of House Lane to serve as a protector to the family itself. And finally was the Company of the Trident. It was formed from any of the soldiers who didn't have a strong attachment to Westeros and wanted to see the lands of Essos. Being outfitted and taken care of by House Lane, any contract taking by a member would send part of the payment to House Lane. Aquila Lane on her own turned House Lane into one of the most martial families in Westeros. And with the wealth that came in from Trident's Crux now being a home for metalwork and the mercenary contracts, she was able to begin construction on a new castle located in the center of the town. William, Sven, and Aquila are the first 3 generations of my family. They made us who we are today, and none have come close to the greatness they achieved. Or should I say, until now. Hey everyone, Jasper here. If you made it this far, thank you so much. This is a bit of a passion project for me, and even though I know this won't exactly do that well number-wise, I am still pleased about this getting made and for all of you to see. This also served as a bit of a testing ground and practice for future videos like this, but using lore-accurate houses rather than my terrible original creations. So while it's not going to be common, expect some future works with houses like the Umbers, Blackwoods, and pretty much any house that never got a dedicated Histories and Lore video. Also, massive shout out to MalSolo. He did all the art in this video, including the animated parts. And I didn't even ask for the animated parts. He did that despite me telling him I couldn't afford it. His response? My name is going to be on this, so might as well make it look good. He also has practically no experience with animation, so he was making this shit up as he went. So please check him out with the links down below. And also, a massive shout out to Kassan for the original music he made for this video. I had to crack the whip on him sometimes, but the wait was more than worth it. Once again, check him out down below. With that said, stay safe, and I hope you all have a wonderful night.